Hi, my name is Tom, and today I'll be talking to you about the structure of the nervous system, and more specifically, I'll be talking about the general structure. So, we can think about the general structure of the nervous system in two main ways. First, we have the central nervous system. Central nervous system. And for that, we can have the acronym CNS. And then we have the peripheral nervous system. And we can have this acronym. So what we do when we think about the nervous system, we have these two main systems. In the central nervous system, we have the brain, looks something like this, and then we have the spinal cord coming out. Obviously, it's not bendy like this, I'm just stylizing it, but we have the brain, and then this thing here is the spinal cord. Cord. Now it's important to note this doesn't include the branching out from the spinal cord, because that's actually, if we think about these branches coming out, it's not this long, but this starts to enter into the peripheral nervous system. So when we are looking at the peripheral nervous system, we are mostly thinking about things coming towards the brain and central and spinal cord, and then things going out. So the things that are going in are called the afferent. It's called the afferent division. Okay. So that's a sort of a class of neuron which I've discussed in a previous video, which I'll put a link to up here. So just click up here if you want to see different classes of neurons. But if you're okay with this idea of afferent being arriving, I mean a way you can think of it as the A is arriving, then that's okay. But otherwise you can click up there and I'll put a link to the other video. So there's this arriving division, this afferent division, and then you have this efferent division, this exiting division. So it's exiting from the central nervous system. So in the afferent division, we can have information about, say, from our somatic system. Now, our somatic system includes things like muscles and skin. Another afferent. I should explain. So skin is an obvious one. If you touch something, you feel that. You have afferent information. You have information arriving, going into the central nervous system. But muscles actually have feelings too, not emotions, but feelings. You can actually feel like the stretch of the muscle, the relative sort of, which gives you an idea of sort of your relative body positioning and things like that. The next thing is visceral. Now I always stuff up this word, F-I-S-S. Yeah. Oh no, I've stuffed it up. Visceral. You'll have to forgive me. I've never been a good speller, but visceral. That's looking terrible, but I'm sorry. Okay. So visceral. The thing about the V in this. So V is for vessels, blood vessels, more specifically. So these are things which you don't really think about, and you're not really conscious of. So you have vessels, and as you have things like glands, say the adrenal glands, which release adrenaline and noradrenaline, or if you're in the United States, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So those are those sorts of you have all these afferent arriving information from the afferent division. The next thing is what you normally think of when you say senses, and these are the special senses, or special division, or special sensory system. So these are all sensory systems: the somatic sensory system, the visceral sensory system, and the special sensory system. So the special senses are taste, smell, so those are chemical, smell, hearing. That's obviously, it's kind of like a hyper version of touch. If you think about hearing, you're sort of feeling sound waves, aren't you? So you've got hearing, balance, vision, and that's it for the special senses. Okay, so we have all this information going in. All this information goes into the afferent division, goes in to the central nervous system, goes through the spinal cord, goes through the brain, and then comes back out the afferent division. So this this efferent, sorry, did I say the efferent division is what I meant, starting with E. So the efferent division then breaks up into different motor sections. So you have the somatic, okay, because you want to be able to move your muscles. And then you have what we sort of group together as the autonomic. Okay. Now to remember autonomic, you can think of oh dear, not very good with my spelling today, am I? Autonomic. My apologies. So autonomic. So you have the somatics, which are sort of what you consciously think of, and to help you remember, I've got a picture here. Oh, does it work? No. Ah, there it is. So when you put on a sombrero, you have to think about it, don't you? So you have to use your somatic system. Somatic, sombrero, somatic, sombrero. Okay. And then in the autonomic system, you don't think about it. It's automatic. Okay. I know it's a bit of a clumsy way of remembering it, but if it helps you, you've got the sombrero is somatic, and then autonomic is automatic. So in the automatic or autonomic system, we have the sympathetic branches, sympathetic, and the parasympathetic, and the enteric. Now the enteric is stomach stuff, digestive tract stuff. The sympathetic is for making things like helping you react to something which is stressful, and parasympathetic is something helping you to sort of calm down, to digest food, and just calm and be happy and all the rest of it. Alright, so these are the two main systems. You have the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and you have this sort of, you have this afferent division here, which sends information towards the brain. And then you have this efferent division. This is in the peripheral nervous system only, the efferent system, and that's sending information out to do things, to react to the world. So, obviously we have to make some connections between these systems. So in the central nervous system, we have, we tend to find that neurons tend to sort of group up. So say this was one neuron, we have the soma or the body up here, and we have the dendrites at the end. We have, say, just a single neuron. We probably won't find one like that. We'll find a whole bunch going together like this, okay? No, I'm not drawing it in detail, but you get the idea. So they all sort of group up. The same goes for the peripheral nervous system. The same thing sort of happens. Now in the peripheral nervous system, we call this a nerve, okay? But in the central nervous system, we don't call it a nerve. We call it, say, some people call it a pathway. I like to call it a pathway. But we can also call it a tract, okay? So if you hear someone talking about a particular pathway or a tract, they're talking about a group of neurons moving within the central nervous system only, and in the peripheral nervous system, if you hear the term nerve, and this is the confusion. If you hear the term nerve, you're talking about groups of neurons, because of course this sort of has become common language, nerve. So sometimes people confuse this with just a single neuron, and that's not right. Okay, it's a combination of neurons together. Now, I haven't mentioned about the brain structure yet, but I think it's fairly common knowledge that the brain is actually separated into two halves like this, and then there's this joining section in the middle. Now, this joining section is called the corpus callosum or corpus callosum, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it. And when you have groups of neurons travelling through there, we don't call it a pathway and we don't call it a tract. They have a special name, and they're called commissures. So let's see if I can get my spelling right for this. Commissures, yes. Oh, no, I think it's got another S there. You'll have to really forgive me, I'm terrible at spelling today, but you get the idea. So there are special names for groups of neurons which make connections with one another. Funnily enough, there's not really sort of, if you have a group of neurons travelling from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system or vice versa, you don't really give that a name. Generally, you talk about where it originated from, or, well, where most of it is. So, for example, the peripheral nerves sort of, start in the central nervous system and go out. But they can have connections. So here, for example, if we went up here, we'd have this sort of second connection. So you have sort of you have pathways, I guess you could call them. Yeah, pathways. But it's not the same as this sort of sense though. We probably would call this like a pathway, a neural pathway, which is confusing, I know. But we have short pathways, so that would be a short pathway. There's only two there. But in the central nervous system, we can have heaps. We could have, just going forever, all these different neurons, all interconnected, a big jumbled mess. And that's really what it is. And so we could have maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. Who knows? There could be so many for some things, but for a few, there might be 3 or 4 or 5. It sort of depends where you're measuring from, where you're going to. So maybe if we want to kick a football, there's only say 3 or 4 sort of groups of neurons. So we have different tracts, say, or different pathways, and they all culminate together and they go out, and then they go and let us kick the football. All right, so these are ways that we can connect between the two main areas of our nervous system: the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Now, another thing is that, as you just saw, and I'll go back, you saw that I grouped the things up together which had similar functions. This one here as well, okay? And in the peripheral nervous system, when we group things up like this, because we find that the somas, or the cell bodies of the neurons, tend to group together like this, and then we have things going into it. So we have this sort of way station, if you like, yeah? And this area here, this is called a ganglia. Okay, and that's only when we're talking about the peripheral nervous system. When we're talking about the central nervous system, we are talking about, in the case, say, of this, or maybe if we're higher up in the brain, that might be down in the, well, let's say this is the brain stem area, and then this might be sort of the spinal cord. So, we're going from the spinal cord down there, down here, and you can see this is a fairly short pathway. right? So we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps to get to the muscle of, this can be a muscle for our leg or something to kick the football. So this is the idea. So we have, so in the peripheral nervous system, these groups, these are called ganglions, but here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, these are not called ganglions, these are called nuclei, okay? And I know it's confusing because you've probably heard the term nuclei before when you think about a cell. When you have a cell, you have a cell nuclei or nucleus. So, that's a bit confusing, but unfortunately, science isn't always simple and people like to, they're not very creative sometimes. They just use the same word for the same thing, or people use different words for the same thing. It's very silly. But unfortunately, that's just how it is. So when cells are when neurons are grouping together like this, when they're moving together in the central nervous system, we call it a tract or a pathway. If they're moving between the hemispheres, between the two main sections of the brain, or the two main halves, we're talking about commissures. When we're talking about groups travelling together in the peripheral nervous system, we are not talking about tracts or pathways or commissures. We're talking about a nerve. And then when they group together like this, we're talking about ganglions. Okay? So, what have we learned? We've learned that there's two main systems and a whole host of subsystems. We've learned that there are inputs and outputs to the main central nervous system, and that's in the peripheral nervous system. So these are peripheral nervous system stuff. And then neurons travel and group together, as I was just explaining. So I hope this has been helpful, and that's all for now.